Hi, y'all. Thank you so much for tuning in to ATX Television Festival Season 10. We are so excited to be able to share this early look at the new UFO docuseries from Showtime and Bad Robot, which hopefully you just watched if you're joining us now. I hope you're as intrigued and excited to see where this goes as we are. Before we dive in, just a friendly reminder to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at ATX Festival and tweet about your favorite panels and Q&As with hashtag TV for all. No spoilers though. Okay, I'm dying to hear more about how this series came together and the big questions that this team is exploring. So let's go ahead and bring out our excellent moderator, Anthony Bresnikan from Vanity Fair. Hi, Anthony.
Hey, everyone. Well, thank you all for joining us here at the ATX Television Festival. As she said, I'm Anthony Bresnikan. I'm an entertainment writer for Vanity Fair, and today we'll be exploring the Showtime UFO docuseries that will premiere on the network later this summer on August 8th. It's a 4-part series, and it delves into our enduring fascination with unidentified flying objects and the interesting way this phenomenon has moved from the realm of fantasy and legend into something approaching a much more serious examination. And joining us today are 3 guests who worked together to put together this Showtime docuseries. I want to welcome director Mark Monroe, who wrote the Academy Award winners The Cove and Icarus, as well as the recent documentary The Dissident, about the murder of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Mark, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We're also joined by Glenn Zipper. He's the executive producer of the docuseries. He produced the Oscar-winning doc Undefeated, as well as the Netflix docuseries Dogs and Challenger Final Flight.
Thanks for having me.
And lastly, we have Leslie Kane. She is an investigative journalist featured in the series, but she also co-wrote the New York Times articles that really changed the way we think and talk about the phenomenon of unidentified flying objects. Leslie, thank you for joining us.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So many of us remember reading those articles that you co-wrote in late 2017. They really redefined the way the media and in some ways the official powers that be in the US government talk about this phenomenon that's existed pretty much for as long as Earth beings have been able to look up. We've wondered what's in the sky, what's beyond our immediate knowledge. And I wondered if you could start by talking about how long you have been following this phenomenon and how that coverage has changed over the years.
Yeah, well, I've been covering the phenomenon now for 21 years, actually. My first story was in the year 2000. It was a feature piece for the Boston Globe, and I've been just pursuing it ever since as a freelancer. And I have seen a gradual shift in terms of, the media taking it seriously, more people taking it seriously. I also did some press conferences and things that helped bring seriousness to it. But the real turning point was the moment you mentioned in December of 2017, when I teamed up with 2 colleagues from the New York Times, and we published this front page blockbuster story that changed everything and really set us rolling and set the snowball going for what's happening now. And it's been building and building ever since. So that was a major turning point in my journalistic career on this.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything that inspired your interest in this? And I want to open this up to Glenn and Mark too. You guys have made a lot of different kinds of documentaries over the years, but I assume you've all had an interest in this, as most people do. I think wherever you fall on the spectrum of believing or not believing, or being skeptical, or having your own theories about what may be, like I said, beyond our knowledge. What is it that interests you as a person? Glenn and Mark, why don't we start with you?
Well, for me, I think it's at the intersection of 2 very distinct parts of who I am. I have a very sort of analytical mind, and I started out as an attorney and as a prosecutor, but I also have always been fascinated by and enjoy science fiction. And I've always been trying to find a sweet spot in the Venn diagram between those 2 things. And I would seek out content, documentary content, journalistic content about UFOs, and UFO-related phenomena. But for me, it always trended a little bit too much like towards the sensational, alien autopsies, ancient aliens, things like that. And look, I mean, that stuff, the people who make that stuff, kudos to them because it's great. It's highly entertaining. But to me, it was entertainment. And then when Leslie's article came out, I said, wow, now this is finally scratching the surface of what we've always needed to see, what we've always wanted to see. And I thought that was a great place for us to start in terms of making a documentary series like this.
I'll say, from my point of view, you know, I can't say that I was or have been obsessed with UFOs for a long time or with the phenomenon for a long time, but I am obsessed with stories and storytelling. And I think I really love stories with mystery. And a lot of times in the work that I do on other films, on other topics, I'm leaning into a mystery, you know, that may not be, you know, so evident, right? So right there in front of you. And with this story, I mean, that is the story, right? The mystery, right? I think it touches upon the, you know, some of the big questions, right? That all of us, I think, you know, ask ourselves from time to time. What are we doing here, right? Are we alone? What is out there? What's the meaning of life? I think the UFO space holds all that in it, right? And I think that's what's super exciting about it. And you're right, Glenn. The article, Leslie's article, what was like a you know, tipping point moment that you could really focus in on and start to engage and explore those stories from that moment.
And Leslie, how about you? What was the spark or the inciting incident, I guess, that made you interested in this topic?
The spark for me, I mean, was I always have a curiosity, like Mark said, about, and just a wonder for mystery. But in terms of my journalism, in 1999, there was a report that came out of France in which generals and admirals and police officers and this group of people got together for 3 years and studied the UFO phenomenon. And they studied all these official records of cases. And they put out this 90-page report, which I was sent an advance copy of in English. And they looked at these cases and they described them and everything, but they came to the conclusion that they thought the most valid, logical explanation for the cases they studied was what they called the extraterrestrial hypothesis. And as a journalist, I was like reading this thing and I was just floored because these were high-level military people. I mean, they were like, there's an admiral, you know, 4-star generals. They were all retired, but only very recently retired. And they worked for a think tank that was a consultant to the government of France. And so I just thought this is news. This is sort of like a smaller version of what happened in the New York Times, only it was happening in France, you know? So that's really what got me going. And that's what my first story was about. I was just astonished that these people drew this conclusion. And it set me on this path of wanting to learn more and more about it. And the more I learned, the more I found that there's a lot of substance to this topic and that it really is something unexplained. And that mystery too, that is a big part of it that Mark talked about. Because I think that's just such an important part of the whole issue. And I think it gets lost a lot. Right now, everybody's so focused on threat and national security. And I like to keep in touch with the element of mystery and awe that goes along with this. And I've just been really motivated to want to learn as much as I can, partly because of that.
Yeah, your journalism, your reports in the New York Times and elsewhere, and your testimonial as an expert in the docuseries is so important, I feel, to the framework of the story that Mark and Glenn are telling. Fellas, can you tell me about how Leslie's work serves as a kind of framework for what you're exploring in a different medium with a docuseries?
I will say that the idea that you're going to go and pitch a show and say, yeah, I'm going to do a 4-part 4-hour docuseries about just a single New York Times article. Like, it doesn't sound like that's something that's gonna, go off, but there's so much within that article, and it leads so many places, so many interesting places to people who, are not just like in the white hot spotlight now, but people who have been on this story, on this beat, on this mystery for a lot of their lives. And so that's what I think made it super interesting. The fact that it's a bombshell kind of article that kind of like got the world's attention, right? Brought credibility, right? Immediately to people maybe like myself who was not really paying attention to it before. I think that's one thing, but it also landed like a bombshell for people, some of the other characters in the series who have been like working on this for quite some time in the dark, all by themselves, seemingly, like against a strong current of kind of ridicule in some places. That article gave them also kind of credibility, or at least this belief, this sense that they've been doing the right thing. They've been following the right trail. They've been dedicating themselves to something, right, that has meaning in our world, right, to all of us. So I think that's what was super exciting about the the article and the way that it impacted the storytelling for the series.
Glenn, did you want to add something to that?
What he said.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I would add that, the other characters, and there's so many people that have worked on this issue, as you say, for so long, and all of them contributed to making this moment happen. It's not just, so I think it's, it was so satisfying for those people, as you said, who've been plugging away and plugging away and plugging away at this. And then this thing happens and everybody benefits from it. And everybody has contributed. Everybody who's been doing it for all these years is really important. They're all really important. Their work's really important. So, I like the fact that you brought those people into this series. I like the fact that I also really like the way, at least in episode 1, you sort of leave it open. There's no definitive kind of yes or no, they're real, they're not real. I really like the addition of Diana Pasulka that you added to episode 1. She has such an unusual perspective to bring to this that kind of deepens the mystery of the whole thing, as I see it. So I thought she was fantastic.
She's the city council member who,
She's the professor of religion in the first episode, who talks about them more in a religious context and how we've seen similar kinds of events throughout all the religious doctrines. And she wrote this book called American Cosmic, which she talks about. So I just thought she adds a really interesting perspective that you don't see very often in documentaries about UFOs.
What I thought was interesting about the series is that, and given what Leslie just said about how the thing that really attracted her was the testimonial of generals and people in positions of authority, very sober-minded people. I felt like your show was really, you were focusing on people who had authority, not just people who had a wild experience that they can't explain, or some of the P.T. Barnum type individuals that surround this area of inquiry. You seem to be really drawn toward people with credibility. Am I reading that right?
Yes, I mean, I think that's really the story was wanting to have what we thought was the first credible presentation of UFO phenomenon, really asking these questions in a thoughtful and incredible manner. And we needed to have those witnesses, and we needed to have those people of that stature and that ilk speaking to this phenomenon in order to achieve that ambition. It's important to hear from people that are just regular folks who we can identify with, who see things in the sky that they don't understand. Then we also need to see people on the other side of the ledger whose job it is to look out for these things and to protect us. And when their view of these things starts to level up with what general folks like us are seeing, that really tells us something.
The series is co-produced by Bad Robot, and J.J. Abrams is one of the executive producers. We've seen his films from Super 8 to Star Wars. He's always had an interest in science fiction and things beyond our world. What was his contribution to the docuseries?
Well, I entered into a partnership with Bad Robot a couple of years ago, and this is our second project. The first project was the Space Shuttle Challenger project, and this is the second project. And I think everyone at Bad Robot has a fascination with these things. Something that that sits somewhere on the cross section between science fiction and just great storytelling. And so the entire Bad Robot organization leaned into this and gave us every ounce of support that they had. And on this in particular, this project in particular leans into that mystery box thing that JJ is always talking about, sort of the possibilities. And it's exactly what Mark is talking about. We're not saying this exists, this doesn't exist, but there is something here that we don't understand, and let's take a clear-eyed, thoughtful look at it and ask a lot of questions and pick at these questions, and then hopefully our audience will start to make some of these conclusions for themselves as opposed to us telling them what to believe.
Mhm. You had mentioned Alien Autopsy. That's like the famous one from, when was that, the late 80s or 90s? That I assume, Leslie, that did a lot of damage to the actual serious inquiry into this.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much stuff out there like that. And I have never I just don't deal with it. I just stay away from all of that because it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's irrelevant to the actual reporting of the facts about UFOs.
Yeah.
You know, it's just not, there's this whole, kind of underworld of weird UFO stuff. And that's one reason why when I took this on, I just saw my job as being to help people sort all that out, because they want to know that they go on the internet and look up UFOs and they get all kinds of crazy stuff. So I really wanted to provide what we do know and what we don't know about UFOs, and that's what I was focused on as a journalist. And I think, I just to comment on this issue about belief. I mean, there really is no question. It's not a question of belief when you deal with the question of whether there are unexplained phenomena in the sky, because that is an absolute fact that there are. The Navy has told us that already. The Department of Defense has told us that. So we're even talking about objects for which they have a lot of data, for which they have videos, for which they've studied. So we definitely know as a fact that there are unexplained objects, but the question of belief comes in when people talk about whether they're extraterrestrial or whether they're time travelers, and most people kind of associate the word UFO with it, that it actually means an extraterrestrial craft, which it really doesn't. It just means something unidentified that's flying. So I think, there really is an element into this issue that's it's factual. It's not all about belief. The belief comes up when you try to understand what it is, but which we don't know yet.
Yeah.
But we know there's something really well documented there that is very mysterious and unexplained, and is so important now that officials are concerned about its national security implications.
Is that the key to keeping the audience too, whether you're doing it through journalism or in a docu-series, is maintaining that filter to remove the things that to be BS, to keep the viewers from detecting that you're maybe leaning into the more extravagant ideas? And I bring this up because I remember as a kid, a teenager, watching, one of those like Fox documentaries about aliens. And there was a guy interviewed who talked about being abducted and talked about having seen a UFO, and then later said he had an X-ray and there was a chip in his leg that he traced back to the same time. And they showed the chip on TV, and it's this strange little curved shape, a little hook shape, and it was crystal clear. And they said it's made of silica and other trace metals when they analyzed it. And I was like, oh my God, well, there's proof, right? Proof that this guy had been taken and something had been embedded. And my dad said, yeah, silica is glass. That's a piece of glass. And as soon as he said that, I was crestfallen because I thought I was watching a bombshell be revealed, that here is proof that something happened to this guy. And really it was the makers of that particular show, I think, taking advantage of the fact that a kid might not know that silica is what glass is made of. Did you have to avoid that kind of thing of, like, for the sake of entertainment or drama, really filtering out things, or filtering out the chance to make something seem that's credible that's really not?
I mean, I don't think it's avoiding. I think it's going in the direction you want to go. I think Leslie gave us on a platter this credible look at something that's happening that the government was doing that they weren't telling us about because they were taking it seriously, or at least some aspect of it seriously. And so that allows you to follow, I think, more credible breadcrumbs, right? That you don't, there's no need, look, we're doing 4 hours and I don't think ever a need for, we haven't come up against the need to go, oh, how are we going to fill this? Like, let's go get this jokey thing. Like, that's not, it's not necessary, right? Because there is so much fertile kind of ground to explore. And particularly, like I say, these characters, these people who have spent a good chunk of their lives trying to figure it out, right? By credible means, right? And so I just think that like that stuff, the other point I'd like to make about that is that that stuff has seeded a huge audience among us, right? The alien autopsy stuff also leads to, you know, Close Encounters or J.J. Abrams movies. People who just like, they like it, right? Because it's a lot of fun to think about what the possibilities are. And sure, the alien autopsy may have been something on the face of it you were looking at for entertainment, but it still ticks a box about something that is possibly out there beyond us, right? Beyond our ability to understand, right? It doesn't have to be aliens, but it's just the idea that these things kind of provoke that question, right, from within. And they did that to you as a kid and a lot of other kids. And now we're adults and we're still kind of wondering, and we're still going to see J.J. Abrams movies. So,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, Leslie, what influence have fakers and people who are just doing exaggerating things for the sake of entertainment done to the kind of work you're trying to do? Like, I assume it's done a lot of harm.
Really hasn't done that much harm because I just stay away from it. And I just feel like they're in another universe.
Well, in terms of the perception of your reader, you know.
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, especially, you know, I was very aware that I had to, like you said, sort of use language and be very careful to be counteracting that because UFOs were this taboo topic. It wasn't like I was just, I used to report on Burma, on human rights. It wasn't like I was doing that anymore. So, you know, I had to be very sensitive to how I expressed it in the beginning, especially. I had to learn like what's okay to say and what's not okay, and to really be sure that I was, you know, counteracting that kind of cultural attitude towards this, which was that it was a ridiculous thing. Mm-hmm. So I did require a certain kind of, you know, extra seriousness, which might be what you're pointing towards. Yeah. To kind of combat that. And then I think, you know, once I got going on it, it was just a matter of just not engaging with any of that and just staying on the journalistic path, just like I would be reporting on anything else. You know, I treated this topic like I did anything else. The same kind of rigor, the same kind of necessary sources and documents and all of that. And yeah, so eventually it just became much more natural to me, I think. Mm-hmm. But I know what you mean. You know, you have to, you know, there were so many years where every time a mainstream news anchor would cover UFOs, for instance, they would always like play the X-Files theme. Mm-hmm. And then they'd sort of laugh and they'd say, well, we don't really want to talk about little green men, ha ha ha, but let's, you know, here's something for you. So there was always this sort of edge of silliness that we had to overcome. That's sort of what you're talking about. And I'm telling you that never happens anymore. We're in another universe now. Mm-hmm. And that used to happen all the time. So that was something I had to kind of come up against all the time, was that it's just this ingrained sense that this is a taboo topic, that it's just silly, that it's not, you know, it's not real and it's a joke. But that's what's so amazing about what's happening now, is it's completely different.
One of the things that's, I think, really compelling about your work and about the docuseries is that they also, in addition to the allure of that mystery of what is this, what are these lights, what are these visuals, these seeming vehicles that move in ways that defy physics as we know it. But you also talk a lot about how the US government collects information and who it tells about what it doesn't know, and how that leads to distrust, you know, some distrust, and maybe also like more outlandish theories from the public who want to know what this is they see and they aren't being told. So do you see a portion of your work as a reporter and as documentarians being about exploring government transparency? I know that's not as, maybe doesn't have this the snap of UFOs, but it does seem to be an important part of this story, right?
Are you asking me or?
All three of you.
I'll jump in. I think it is an important part of the story. I think, you know, when there's when you know you're not being told the truth, when there's no, you know, kind of ready explanation when there should be one, right? Your mind begins to go. And I think specifically in the world now in which we live, in which you have the internet and the ability for wild theories to run rampant and grab a hold of people. And you see it play out January 6th, right? Like these things are so easy to grab a hold of people. And I think the UFO conspiracy, right? The little green men and the fact that the government maybe has not been fully, upfront about it all leads to these wild conspiracy theories, right? And I think that's part of the story. The way that this is played out in our culture, right, is part of the story of where we are now. That's why where we are now is so remarkable, because of the way it had played out, or had been playing out, when there was a lot of joking about it, there was a lot of stigma, there was a lot of ridiculousness. That's why the article made such a big impression on all of us. So it is part of the overall story, this conspiracy laden kind of field that we're in. I think it makes for a good mix, right? In terms of a rich story to tell, in terms of both the full sweep of history, right, and where we are right now.
Mhm. Is there a justification for, authorities, people in the federal government, people in the military, maintaining secrecy if they really don't know the answer? Is there a danger of frightening people if they come out and say there's this thing happening that we don't fully understand? Is there a reason to keep secrets sometimes?
And it's probably really a matter of personal opinion. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm of the camp where I trust my fellow citizens. I think we deserve to know.
Mhm.
And we can also see how trying to be that paternalistic for the populace can backfire. And we think about Anthony Fauci and the masks, where first he said, don't worry, you don't need to wear the mask, because he wanted to hold them back for first line workers. And then, later people were saying to him, well, we thought you said we didn't need masks. And he tells the truth. He said, well, really, I was just trying to make sure that our first responders and our first line folks had access to them. But now no one knows what to believe.
It's crying wolf, right? When you say something, even if it's for a good reason.
Yeah. And I think we live in a world now where with social media and everyone with a camera in their phone and a camera in their pocket, it's only a matter of time until they won't be able to hide it. So if we're going to start telling the truth, now is the time to start telling it.
I mean, I would also say that, the government is a hard thing to change, right? It's an institution that is, not fast moving, right? In terms of the way it does things. And this phenomenon started when, atomic bombs were going off and Sputnik was flying across the sky. And we were told that the enemy could be anywhere, right? The Cold War was upon us. And there was this belief that anything unusual could cause hysteria, could cause big problems. So I can understand, I'm not saying I think it's the right thing to do, but I can understand where the secrecy of the past came from. In a slower moving world, in a world in which, the unknown seemed a lot scarier, right?
Yeah.
But that great history of secrecy, like now that we live now, you have to wonder, right? Why aren't we coming clean?
Yeah. Well, Leslie, as somebody who has worked so hard to shine a light on this, I can assume that you fully are in favor of more transparency. But what is the rationale of the people you've spoken to for why they maintain this secrecy? What are they afraid of in terms of revealing that they don't know something?
Well, I think with the Pentagon program, which is the program that we revealed in the December story in 2017, we revealed the fact that this program existed and had been studying UFOs since 2007, 2009.
Mhm.
What they've told me is that their reasons for keeping most of it secret is to protect the security of the information so that our adversaries don't have access to it. Because China and Russia are similarly trying to understand how these UFOs work. And what the government program is really interested in is understanding the technology, so that maybe someday we'll be able to create our own technology in a similar to the way these things operate. And so there's this sort of sense of, we got to protect it. We don't want Russia to find out. We don't want China to find out what we actually know. So I sort of understand that, but I also feel that, and I know that this is true too, that there's plenty of information that the government, we'll call the UAP task force, which are the people now in charge of this, are sitting on that would not really be a problem for our adversaries to have access to, such as photographs that don't have any identifying information on them. They did release the 3 videos, and they cut off the parts that they thought were too sensitive. So, you know, they're a Department of Defense. Their job is to protect us. And so they're very focused on this being, you know, this kind of national security threat that we got to protect people. We got to protect ourselves from, you know, being safe in terms of our adversaries. And that's their perspective. I think, you know, if you asked a group of scientists about it, they'd have a whole different reason. I mean, they would probably feel there's no reason at all to have secrecy. So, you know, and I think over the years, yeah, it's been a real irresponsibility. It's just been really negligent of her. And, you know, in the documentary, you covered the O'Hare incident. It was in 2006, and it's just such a glaring example of, it's not that the government will say something happened and we can't tell you what it is. They just stay away from it completely. And the problem is that it's a real problem for the witnesses. That's who I feel like it really isn't fair to, because these are human beings who have seen something, and they're aviation experts, and they need to be able to report it, and they're told not to, and they're told not to talk about it. And it's something that can be life-changing for them, and have all kinds of impacts on them, and they're you know, they're not being treated fairly or with respect. And you did profile the one witness from the Nimitz case in episode 2, and I thought it was so powerful how he revealed the human toll that this event took on him. And that's, to me, that's as somebody who's worked on human rights issues before UFOs, I care about the human rights of these people. There are people who fly our airplanes and work on our Navy ships, and they're not given the respect to be believed and to be able to talk about what they've seen. So to me, that's the big human component that's really important. And I think he did a great job. I'm blanking out on his name. It's terrible.
Kevin Day.
But what was
is it
that?
again?
Kevin Day.
Kevin Day. He was so moving to me in episode 2. I've never seen him. I mean, I've just never seen anything quite like that. And I really thought that was wonderful how you did that with him.
That's the gentleman who's working in the diner and looked up and saw the footage on CNN.
That was the guy from the Nimitz incident, right?
Yeah, from the Nimitz, the radar guy.
The radar guy, and he was just so profoundly affected by this that he ended up having nightmares about it. And you know, I think if he was treated differently, it may not have changed his life in such a negative way. I don't know.
What I found credible about him was that he was somebody who doubted himself, that he wasn't somebody who was wildly trying to prove something that he really didn't have a lot of evidence for. It was somebody who was really questioning what he had witnessed. And I think that questioning quality in his character made him more compelling to me as a viewer.
What I think,
Top Gun graduate. He's a very credible guy.
Yeah.
and I think this goes to the heart of one of the things that I think we found very moving about the whole series, right? You mentioned earlier these, you know, kind of charlatans, the wackos, and there are people who you know make try to make a name for themselves, or try to, you know, advance themselves in some way, financially, whatever. But a lot of the people profiled in this series are people who are going along with their lives and just doing the next thing in their lives, and something happened to them, right? That then they could not turn away. Right? That it changed the entire course of their life in terms of who they are as a person and what they chose to spend time with, that they began to, you know, suddenly you can't stop it. It's a little bit like, you know, Close Encounters, right? It's a little bit like Dreyfus. You know, something happens and it changes you, changes the way you see the world. It changes the way you deal with other human beings, especially when you're being told, you know, it's a joke, you're a joke, forget about it, what's the matter with you, right? So I think the community in this docuseries, the cast, if you want to call it that, have similar stories, right? They stumbled into something happened to them, something happened to someone they knew or they loved, and they began to want to know what's going on here, right?
How did you decide where to start? Because as we've discussed, there have been sightings and people seeing things throughout recorded history. Where was it that you felt like, okay, we're going to start with these particular instances in this particular timeline?
We started doing a tremendous amount of research, even in advance of Mark and Paul coming on, and doing some legwork. And it's a voluminous amount of stuff. It's exhaustive, and it was exhausting to go through it. And after a while, you start to see the cream rise to the top, the incidents that are the watershed moments in these episodes. And then Mark was able to build around those episodes as a way in, and you might want to talk about that, Mark.
Well, it seems like you're sticking to the last maybe 20 some years in more recent decades. Is that about right?
Gives you, and again, the article gives you an entry to the entire universe of the phenomenon, right? And so I think it was important to look at big events that happened in recent history, but prior to this ATIP, right? Prior to this, where the witnesses were ridiculed, were kind of laughed off. You know, we have the Phoenix Lights as the big case in the first one, where it turns into a joke, right? And leaves people whose lives have been affected wondering what is happening. Why is this happening to me, right? Why is this not being taken seriously when it truly affected me? I think you also have these incidents like the Nimitz, like Kevin Day, that lead directly to the article refers to, and that you see the government making the U-turn, right? Taking a different stance, deciding we actually need to do something here. We need to figure out as much as we can what's going on from the people in our own ranks, literally, who are witnessing these things. So I think it's big events, right, that have different meanings given the shape of the world at the time in which they happen.
You know, I want you to please put your speculative hats on now and tell me, what are the realistic possibilities of what it is we're seeing? Are there multiple possibilities? Do you have any theories about what it is that we're seeing? And Leslie, maybe I'll start with you since you've studied it so closely over
I mean, there are multiple possibilities.
Mhm.
And one of them, of course, is that they are some technology that's from Russia or China. Somehow they have leaps and bounds ahead of us, which people say is extremely unlikely, but you've got to keep that on the table. Possibility. And then, if it's not them, and we know it's not us, then you have to get into the more other, off-world or otherworldly kinds of explanations. And I think, a lot of people think the possibility of visitors from other planets, or some kind of interdimensional phenomenon, or some people have speculated about time travelers. I mean, all of it seems really hard to grasp. But if we get to a point where we have an announcement that they've already said it's not ours. So when we get to a point where somebody announces, whether it's our government or a group of people, that it's not Chinese or Russian either, and everybody's standing behind that from those countries, then we're really stuck. I mean, once we know that it wasn't made on Earth, if we get to that point, then we're stuck. And you can speculate, there's all kinds of possibilities that anybody can fantasize about what it might be. But we have to, until we get there, we have to still keep it on the table that it's technology from another country. But more and more officials are saying how unlikely that is. So,
Mark and Glenn, do you have any thoughts about what the possibilities, what seems reasonable?
Personally, I take a pretty pragmatic approach to it. And I think right now we're in the stage where we're sort of pulling away layers and eliminating things. And I think there's some disclosure that's supposed to happen in the near future. And ultimately, it comes down to that Sherlock Holmesian principle, right? When you eliminate all the other possibilities, whatever remains, no matter how absurd it may be, that's the answer. And I'm waiting for that moment.
Yeah, I can't say I have any grand, understanding of what's happening. I'm having enough, fun and trouble following along the story to get it to the place we're at right now. I will say that this release, I think it's remarkable that we live in this time, and I think the article had a lot to do with it, that leads to lawmakers stuffing in a passage in a COVID relief bill that says you got to come clean, and that's supposed to happen right now. And I think, I don't need to guess. I want to see, right? I don't need to like come up with some, speculative notion of what's happening. I want to see what's on paper, what they have that gets us a little bit closer. Even if they don't have the answer, they certainly have something. So what is it? I think that's key to the next step.
I'd like to close by asking each of you where you fall on the spectrum between hopeful and fearful. And I have to admit that my own thought is, if this is something that's another kind of being or another life form or something that it is not really a part of our world, that I'm a little bit fearful, because I look at human history, and anytime strange beings appear in unusual ships, it usually is bad for the people who are standing on the shore watching them arrive. And I don't mean to make light of that. I think it's, there is a thing about living beings, is that whether they're human or animal, when they move from where they originate to another place, they tend to dominate, they tend to destroy. I'm talking about invasive species in a pond could do the same thing. It makes me a little nervous to think that something could be out there, to borrow an X-Files line.
Right.
But where do you fall on that fearful, hopeful spectrum?
I think my opinion might offer you some comfort, which is, if beings are coming from a distant planet or from another dimension, they would have to be so extraordinarily beyond our understanding and level of advancement that if they wanted to destroy us, they would have done it already. What would be holding them back? Why wouldn't they do it already? So I like to think that if that is what's responsible for some of these phenomenon that we're seeing and we're taking a closer look at now, it's coming from a place of curiosity. It's coming from a place of scientific study, and perhaps even coming from a place of wanting to help when the time is ready, or the time is right.
Mark and Leslie.
I will say I'm on the hopeful range, because I feel that any time we can get outside of our own world and see a little bit more about how the big world works, it makes us all better. It makes us all together, right? In this universe, on this boat, going someplace. So I'm on the hopeful side, that more knowledge, more understanding, more just inquisitiveness about what it is brings us together.
Leslie, are you joining me on the dark side, or sticking with them on the...
I actually kind of agree with Glenn. I mean, I think that, these things have been seen since the 1940s and even earlier. And you have to make the point that, if they were out to destroy us, it probably would have happened already. I mean, that's a good point. They are, the other point to remember is that the objects, at least the ones we're seeing now, I mean, there've been so many for so long, but they could just be machines. They don't necessarily have any living beings in them at all. They could be drones or something like that. They could be some kind of probes that were sent out ages ago from some distant civilization. I mean, so, they have become a little more provocative recently with these swarms of Navy ships and so on, but we don't know what those things were. Maybe those were some kind of advanced drones from somewhere else, from another country or something. So I mean, I do err on the side more of the awe and just wanting to understand and just having faith that nothing horrible is going to happen with this issue, or it probably would have happened already. But we never know. So I'd say I'm 75% awe and maybe 25% of the fear factor too. But yeah.
You've reassured me and made me a little more optimistic. Leslie, Mark, and Glenn, I want to thank you all for joining us here at the ATX Television Festival. And to those of you watching at home, keep your eyes on the horizon and on the sky, but also on Showtime this August, when the UFO docuseries makes its debut. Thank you for joining us, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.